Our panel today is Evelyn Bergler, Jesse Castle, Rex Warner, Lois Schaefer, Glenna Royer Donor, and Kenny Kaufman. And each one will talk a short time. Then we'll open it up to the panel, and anybody in the audience is welcome to ask questions, add to anything they might say. This is very informal. Just be comfortable and have a good time. And we'll begin with Rex Warner.
I'd first like to thank the panel for having Garland on this video. This might be the most publicity Garland's received since it's changed its name from Fizzleville back in 1891. A large portion of this material I'll be reading. I was born downtown Garland in October of 1929 in the house that is still standing on the southwest corner of the intersection. My parents, Berlin and Chloe Warner, along with my three older sisters, Sybil, Rhoda, and Mary, and Rhoda's back here in the corner today, had just moved to that location from a farm 2 miles west of Garland. 2 weeks after I was born, they purchased a store and the dwelling catty-cornered across the intersection. And the family moved across that to there at that time. Now, for the early part of this presentation, I'd like to discuss events in and around the operation of the store. Research shows there was a store at this location from the early 1880s, which was owned by Mr. Culber. That is probably the reason Garland early on was called Culberson. Its second name was Fizzleville, and that lasted until 1891 when Garland took over. Back to the store. As I mentioned, this was a general store, so there were many diversified products sold. There were groceries, meats, produce, soft drinks, tobacco, sundries, hardware, livestock feed, Standard Oil products, which we sold Crown, and later on Sohia gasoline. That was one of Rhoda's jobs, was to pump gasoline, and many others. Also, a lot of people ask me about the cost of gasoline that I remember back then. The lowest I ever remember was 15 cents a gallon. And we had two different kinds of gasoline, one regular gasoline and one white gasoline. Many of you might remember white gasoline. That was a gasoline they used in stoves, and I believe some tractors used it. Anyway, we had white and brown sugar were sold in bulk from huge barrels. Soup, beans, rice, and tapioca were sold in bulk from cans. Vinegar was pumped from a large barrel in the cellar. Our produce was purchased from Dominic Lafino, who ran a route out of Dayton. He had a large truck with canvas-covered sides. On the front was painted, "Here comes Donnie, headquarters for bananas." Dominic's son, Charlie, founded the Lafino stores in Beaver Creek, where I now live. Ironically, Charlie's son, Mike, now the owner of Lafino's, was a student in my Beaver Creek High School math class. By the way, if you ever get down to the Lafino store, look for that picture of Dominic's truck that I told you about. Included in one corner of the Warner store was an area for testing cream. Surrounding farmers brought their cream in to be tested for butterfat content. The higher the butterfat, the more they would be paid for the poundage brought in. Sometimes groceries were exchanged for the cream. My mother and sister Sybil were licensed by the state, and that's Sybil's daughter back there, Janet Hess, who still lives in the Garland area. In 1935, a spatial room was added for the cream testing process. Almost every night, year-round, excluding Sundays, surrounding farmers, and I'm sure these people will be naming names, and I'll be naming some pretty soon, in the area, would gather at the store to discuss and solve the local, state, and nation's problems, just like today. In the winter, they were seated on benches around the pot-bellied stove in the storeroom, and in the summer, it would be on benches and swings on the porch. In the summer, the kids of the area would also gather at the store for games of many types. Many times it ended up being round town, a form of softball. Home plate was an old Standard Oil sign, which today would probably be worth $500. First base was one of the gas pumps. Second base was across the range line road to a telephone pole. Third base was back across the range line to a light pole, and finally across Garland Frederick Road to home. There was some close calls with automobiles, but I don't ever recall anyone getting hit. By the way, the intersection at that time, the stop signs were only on the Garland Frederick Road. Range line was a thoroughfare. Every summer you could count on a contingent of gypsies, maybe 15 to 20 of them coming by. If my mother saw them coming, she would pull the blinds and lock the door. Most times she didn't get a chance to do that, however, and they made their way into the store. Each went their different ways, and it was impossible to keep an eye on all of them. We knew many things were missing, but we could never catch them in the act. We needed the security cameras that they have today. Early on, I mentioned that my family had moved from the farm in 1929 to take over operation of the store. The reason for this move was because of the ill health of my father. His health worsened and he passed away in early 1933. My grandfather, Marion Warner, had moved in with the family to help care for Berlin and run the business. My mother, along with the kids and grandpa, continued to operate the store until early 1942. Due to the rationing of supplies at the beginning of World War II and her failing health, my mom decided to close the store at this time. She continued to live in the dwelling until 1967. Shortly after she moved out, a car traveling at a high rate of speed hit the building and demolished what was the storeroom. The building sat in disrepair for 2 years after this, tied up in the courts, when finally the complex was torn down. And I have a couple pictures of the store. That's from the front of it, and that's from the side of it. And this is the range line right here. The house sat about 3 feet from the road. Now I'm to introduce my uncle through marriage, Kenny Kaufman, and that's his niece, my wife, sitting on the end down there, Gloria.
Okay. All right. Well, I am Kenny Kaufman, the last old-timer around Garland. I live a half a mile west of Garland, where I was born on an 80-acre farm in 1925, still there. I can remember Garland had a grocery store owned by Bud and Chloe Warner. They had a gas pump. You pumped the gas up in a glass bulb by hand, and the gas filled the car up without no electric. I remember Doc Desucker had a cider mill 1/2 mile south of Garland on the right side of a range line road. I went to Sunday school at the community house. It was moved to Garland from 1 mile east of Phillipsburg, Ohio, at the corner of Pansing Road and Phillipsburg Road, through the fields, a long range line road to Garland in 1920. That is what Ellen Walker said. Ellen is still living at 100 years old, September the 5th, 2011. My mother went to number 13 school 1.5 mile west of Garland. I went to number 13 school. One teacher taught 4 grades, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th, in a one-room schoolhouse. They tore the number 13 school down in 1938. We had to go to West Milton School. My dad owned the 1 acre school ground. Dad built a house on the same foundation and used the same brick from the schoolhouse in 1941. I can remember Garland Road was called, was Garland Road. It was Garland Road a long time. Now it is called West Frederick Garland Road. So now this is Lois Rohr.
Thank you.
I went to school with her.
Lois Rohr Schaefer. Okay. My family lived on a 40-acre farm on the Range Line Road, about 1.5 miles north of Garland. We raised corn, wheat, oats, hay. And then I was saying that we helped, the children helped. We hoed weeds in the corn, and in the hay field, after my sister swathed the hay, I would make piles, and then we would go through the field with the wagon, and my dad, I guess, would probably load it. He would put the hay fork in a load and raise it up to the wagon. So that was really a big operation. In the barn then, I kept the single tree upright after the horse pulled the fork up in the mow. And that was another big job, and I had to pay attention, do it right, because my older sister, she was guiding the horse. And my sisters and my brother all went to Garland. My brother was Harold, and then Evelyn and Miriam. We raised strawberries and tomatoes to sell at the market in Dayton, and we also sold to the tomato canning factory in Laura and Tip City. We would go to the Garland store sometimes for bread, and I remember we took our cream to sell at the store. And sometimes we walked, but I guess if we had a big load of cream, we wouldn't walk. We like to go to the store and talk to our friends, too, down there. And then I'm going to talk a little about the school. I think I started school in 1932, and I went to Garland School in the 5th, 6th, and 7th grades. And we had Mrs. Edna Tice as a teacher, and here she is when she was a young lady. She was a friend of my husband's aunt. That's the reason I have the picture. I remember especially the ciphering that we had at school. Mariana Warner, she was such a cipherer. I still remember how she could look at the top number, and before I was halfway down the column, she was finished. And she had the right answer, too. And Miss Frances Miles was our music teacher. She would come, and I remember she would have a record player, and she would play these records of the known artists at the time, and we would have to memorize those titles, and then, she would test us on that. And I do remember, too, that the classes would, see, it was 4 grades, and so the classes would go to the front of the school building, and there was a big bench across, and they would face the teacher, and so their backs were to us. And I know my husband always says he thinks that's the reason we learn so well, because we would hear, you know, these recitations. And I remember we played baseball. And I remember one time I got hit in the nose, and I thought I was killed, but I wasn't. I'm here. And we played Round Town. The girls played Round Town. And I remember we played handy over the schoolhouse with the ball. That was one of the things we did in recess. And we also did something that was not very smart, for me anyway. In the spring, when it would rain, you know, the side ditches would fill with water. And we thought that was so much fun to splash stones in there. Well, you know what? I got poison ivy. Oh, I thought I was dying then. And I do remember the boys helped fire the furnace. I think they did. Didn't you help fire the furnace? Yeah. Okay, and I remember bringing a bucket of water in and putting it on a bench when we drank that water through the, I don't know whether we would be able to go more than just at recess. I don't know that. And do you remember Mr. Million, the Coca-Cola salesman? He would come around to our schools, and he would give us a nature study, really. He would go traveling, I guess, in Africa and bring all these pictures, and he would flash them on the front of the school building. And he would give us tablets and pencils and rulers. And then I also remember that we had a nurse, Mary Miller, and she would come around, I don't know how often, and check the kids out. Next is Glenna Royer, donor.
Yes, I am Glenna Royer, donor, and my parents moved there when I was 3 years old. So I don't remember a lot of the first growing up. I know that I was an only child, and I had chores and things that I had to do. It didn't make any difference whether it was morning or night. I got up early and went to the barn I always had 2 cows I had to milk, and I had to learn how much feed to put in the box in front of them so they would eat while we milked. And then I had to learn other things around the house. I had to carry in the cobs and the kindling to start the stove in the mornings. And I learned how to, when we raised all the regular farm things, and I had to help when it was time to set tobacco. And my Grandpa Royer would drive the horses, and my dad and I would be placing the tobacco down by the time the spigot run for water, and sometimes it was just, he was going too fast, and my dad would holler at him to stop, and he'd say, "Well, what?" And my dad would say, "Slow down a little bit." So he says, "Well," and then he'd mumble, and then he'd go on, and sometimes we got right back up to the regular speed that we were going. But then finally it all got done. And then I had to learn, I learned to hoe and not cut off if I cut off a thing, why, we had to replant, and I was out there replanting, so I learned to be careful. And then when it was coming time, my grandpa would say, well, now, we'd go out in the tobacco fields, and he said, "Now, you're looking for every worm you pull off and pull down, throw down on the ground, I'll give you a penny." So that was something that I learned to do. Wasn't very much fun, but then I learned it. And there was other things that I had. When we took in the hay, why, we had a barn hill, and so they'd run the wagon up into the barn hills and into the barn, and then I would lead the horse down the hill to when they hooked the big hay fork on the hay, and I'd go down to the end of the hill, and then I'd stand there till they hollered that they had it in there, and then they would they would put the fork back down, and then I would unhook the horse and take it back up to the barn door, and then do it all over again. And we didn't have the regular horses, ours was mules. And one was he was half blind, but he was still jittery. And I was just scared to death of those big feet. I knew I was going to get stepped on sometime, but then it didn't happen, so it was okay. And other things, I had chores around the house. And then when my dad then got the Ford tractor, then I was able to run it and do a few things. But then usually he took care of it, but then he was kicked in the back by a cow one night when we were milking. And he was laid up. He had problems for years. And finally had to have surgery, and they fused the vertebrae. And then he wore a brace the rest of his life. But then he would hire the young fellows around, to help him out in the field. And I remember there was Abshears, and there was Helmick's, and Kaufman's, and there was somebody else, Helmick's, that they all took turns, and Mother always was cooking for somebody to feed. And when we moved there, the house had been empty for several years, and it was terribly dirty, and Mother was so upset, and my grandfather says, "Oh, you can get it cleaned up." And, well, he was in the country. There was no, it wasn't modern. The water pump was on the back porch, and there was a pole out there that held up the roof of the back porch. And Mr. and Mrs. Gibney lived there before the folks. And then Rex's grandpa, Marion, lived there, and that pole was there. They said all the time that they were there. So I don't know. The folks then sometime repaired the roof. And there's other things, but I can't think of them right now, that we had chickens, and every now and then there would be a chicken that wanted to set on her nest, and so if I was lucky, why, I got a chicken that hatched out little eggs and had little chicks to play with and look after. So that was farm life, and to me it was nothing but farm. There was nothing else to do for me. I finally, as I grew older, I was allowed to walk down to the store and play with Mariana, but I could only stay for about an hour, and then I had to walk back. And I remember the folks visiting down at the store different times, and the store had a telephone. We did not have a phone, so my dad would have to go down there and use the phone if we needed something. Usually it was the doctor for me, because I was sick a lot. And when we went to number 6 school, was down there for 4 years, and Miss North was our teacher. And I remember the little Oaks boy was sick, and he died. And they said he had diphtheria and other complications. And then when I was in the 4th grade, I had scarlet fever and was out for a month. And Miss North would come up and visit and talk to Mother and bring, when I began to get better, why, she brought homework. But then anything I touched had to be burnt and gotten rid of. So I didn't have very much left for my childhood, because it all had to be disposed of. And then when we went to number 13 school, our Harshbarger was our driver for number 6 school. And then at number 13, I think it was Ralph Warner. And then when the schools closed in the 5th grade, we went to West Milton. And then after I think it was 6 weeks, because they told us we could stay if we had our homework done. We were 6 weeks behind our schoolwork. So I had my 6 weeks made up, and then I stayed in West Milton for the rest of the 5th grade, and then came back out for the 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. So that there was more. There was neighbors. Across the street was a John Donor and his wife, and he was the grandfather of John Shelley that lived up the road that was in school with us most of the time. And then behind us was Cadell's and Mendenhall's, and they had a youngster that passed away, and so Mother then and another lady, I forget who the other neighbor was, that went back and stayed at the house and stayed overnight until after the funeral with the family. And then other ones around. I had the 3rd grade, great-great-great-grandparents lived in the house where Seilers lived. And this was taken in 1920. They were visiting the house. But then the grandparents lived there. It was John and Mary Hickman. And they had said, the article said that they were married in Dayton, moved to West Milton, and then moved to Garland Road, and was there and raised, they had a family of 10. And the youngest one that was born was in, it was, I can't think now what, 1848 and 1888. So I do have that, and they were buried at Branch Cemetery. So I do know I had some relatives there back, and but nobody ever talked about it till Mother told me that this is what it was. My grandparents never talked about it, that I remember. So I guess that's all for about now, so I'll talk to Evelyn.
Well, I guess I didn't, I should say good afternoon to everybody. And I didn't understand if it was gonna have all this, but I got some things that some of the rest haven't talked about, but what I want to dwell on is the number 13 school and Garland, and Chloe and Rex's home there, which I know very well. And one thing Rex didn't say, and I don't know, I've got a lot of things that, and the head doesn't always help you, you know. Not now when you get my age. And I'm not going to tell you what my age is. But anyway, I went to school at the number 13 school, and Jess and I one morning, I'll have to tell this first, Jess, we fiddled around too much. Wasn't, I don't think we was out milking or anything. Missed the school bus. And of course, Mother knew that we wasn't behaving. And so she told us, you have to walk to school. Well, I have always said it was at least 2 miles, but I don't think it was from our house, which was down the road about, what, did you say quarter mile?
And a mile and a tenth.
Yeah,
to
where we lived.
Garland, and then another.
And it was
Quarter
cold,
mile.
ice cold. And Jesse, he kept saying, I'm cold, I want to go home. And I said, I know that, I'm cold too, and we didn't like our mom a bit, neither one of us. But we finally got to the school. And some things about the school, I enjoyed it. It was a number 13 school where Harold's, I hope I'm calling everybody the right name, where Harold's father, Copeland, that was the Copeland home.
Kenny.
Copeland's ground, I always thought. And we had a teacher there. Her name was Charlotte Randall. I'm not going to say what I was going to say about her, but anyhow, things did not go well. None of us learned anything. But we did make potato soup on a coal stove. And I tell you, I always remembered that, never forgot that. And then I went into the grocery, and Chloe, now I don't remember all those people's, I probably did pay a lot of attention. I just expected people to do what they did, and I did what I did. But Chloe would always come with a sack of candy, and for a penny. We got this stick candy, all different colors, which you get today now. And that was a sizable sack. And now I don't know what this means, something about, no, my writing isn't so good, and it's part of this, my sister's writing. So anyway, in the community house, and that, it was used for a church, it was used for a community house, it was used for a playroom, it was used for many things. And we used to have Farmers Institute, that building, spelling bees, I can remember that. We had a dance one night. We used to play ball all around there, and Andy over on that building. And I remember they were thinking about getting rid of it. I don't know how many times they talked about getting rid of it, and it seemed like nobody wanted to be there, but yet nobody didn't want, or they didn't want to go. Well, anyway, I've got that right here. I remember that we also had the people from Phillipsburg come, and we had a big choir one night, and everybody from all around came and sang. And let's see what else I got there. Back about about the gas pump. It was 13 gallon was the lowest. And didn't your mother and them have kerosene there?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I always thought that was the white gasoline.
No, that was different.
Yeah, I know that now, but I thought that at that time. We also had, which wasn't mentioned, a, what do you call those people in the truck like Lafita's was?
Gypsies,
No, ours was named Studi. Huckster, yeah, Studi.
Out of Inglewood.
That's the one that brought our stuff, or that I remember. And we had lots of transits, and we had lots of gypsies too. Well, let me see. I have to get back to what I was thinking there now. Well, in my home, there was 7 children, but 6 grew up, and we had lots of work. We raised tobacco, you name it. And we'd have to go out and hoe, and I'm going to tell something, maybe I shouldn't. But there's a couple people in the family went out to plant some beans or peas or something, and they decided it was too much to do, and so they just dug some holes somewhere, threw them all in, covered it up, and went off to play. Well, you know what happened. Now, that was one of the kids, or 2. Another one decided he didn't want to hoe corn, so he jumped the fence and went to town, and left 2 more of us there out there hoeing the corn, which that wasn't much fun. And, well, now the younger ones I don't know too much about. I remember them, and they were very nice and sweet. I thought they'd kill one another once in a while, but anyway. And I do remember something about Eileen Seiler. Something about lying in her face. What was that? Or don't we know? Okay. Well, I think I'm going to turn that over to Jesse
Well, I want to
Castle.
thank the committee for having us here today, to learn a little more about Garland. And I also want to say as you know, Evelyn's my sister, and Norma's another one of my sisters. And I'm happy to have my lady friend, Iris Boland from Greenville, along with me today. I'm like Kenny and Rex. I'll read a good part of what I've never been a great statesman up in front of people, so.
So Jesse, can you read loudly, a little louder so we can hear
Yes.
out?
The village should have been named Needmore. It needed more houses to make a town. The township house lay just a stone's throw west of the corner grocery, a store at the corner of Diamond Mill and Garland Frederick Pike intersection. The Howard Castle Farm was 1 1/10 mile east of the store. We were a family of 9, 5 boys and 2 girls. One year, all 6 of us got on the school bus at the same time. A Model T Ford, if I remember right, was the earliest school bus that circulated a little around our area there. When I started the school, I really didn't want to go till I wasn't going to be 6 till December after I was 5 at time to go to school. So when the bus came, I had a bad earache. So Mother told the bus driver I was sick, so he went on. A short while after the bus left, my ear got better. Needless to say, Mother wasn't happy. So she grabbed me up, and to schoolhouse we went. A quarter of a mile west of the corner of the grocery on the opposite side of the road. When we got there, I put up a TR. A TR meant tirade. Mother said to me, if I take you down to the store and get you a little sack of candy, will you go to school? I said I would. And when we got back to the schoolhouse, I had changed my mind. Then Mom grabbed me, and in the schoolhouse we went. She socked me down in the desk, and Miss Broomball was my teacher at that time. Gave me a coloring book, and I colored the rest of the day. The schools were numbered. Number 13 was, at that time, I think first included 6 through 8 grades in the school. Number 12, I thought, I don't remember for sure, 7th and 8th, number 12.
Oh, no. I went to West Milton on the 6th grade.
In 6th grade. 12 was 1 mile approximately east of Garland and the store. 12 was across from our family farm. The consolidation of Milton Union schools meant we were all bused to West Milton when I was in the 3rd grade. Some of the people who lived around Garland and in during the 20s and 30s, the Warners managed the store. Wilbur Royer, Glenda's parents, lived north of the store. Ernie and Harley Warner east of the store. Sam and Effie Winger and family west toward the school, number 13. Also the Baker family, Dieter family, the Kaufmans, Kenny's family, just west of 13. Doc Desecker ran the cider mill just south of Garland. A couple little interesting human. Doc Desecker liked to get a little polluted, and he came up the road one day, and we were herding cattle out. And my brother Don, Doc had the window down on his car as he went by, and Don hollered at him, "Hi, you barfly." And made Doc mad. He just stopped the car and crawled out and gave Don a whack. Don's the one that Evelyn was talking about. He was a comedian. The story that Evelyn talked about the cold day that she and I had to walk to school. When we got in the school building, the school teacher, my hands were so cold, she stuck them under in warm water, and I went out like a light. So that was kind of perplexing. And the gas pump that you talked about, I remember you had to use the arm like this to fill the glass above. You got a picture there, Rex, got a picture of that. I want to thank all of you for letting me carry on a little here. I do have some pictures. I was very small when I went to West Milton to school, and I have pictures of West Milton in the third grade, the fourth grade. The teacher of the fourth grade really liked me. She kept me 2 years. And then I'm in here the seventh grade. I tried to find a picture of the school. Okay? And I remember one time your mail cow got out. We kids were all out. It was noontime, and we kids all were out playing. And here come that big bull. And boy, I'm telling you, we scattered, went in the school building. The big bull went in the ladies' toilet, and boy, you could see he was trying to get turned around to get back out of there. So that was kind of comic. Okay, well, thank you. This fellow don't have much to say here.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about the store. It also was a post office in
Yes.
Garland from 1891 to 1906.
Huh.
And I've been trying to find a postmark of that for many, many years. I have a copy of one, but I don't have the real McCoy. So if anybody out there has one, look me up. Now this, at the end of 1906, when the post office went out, there was a group that petitioned the West Mountain Post Office to run a rural route out Garland and the area around there, and they were refused. Nadine put that in your notes. They were refused by West Mountain. So they went to Union, and Union accepted them, and that's the reason today Garland Frederick Road and all east or all south of there is Union, or later on some of them went to Englewood too, but it's the same route. And by the way, the Diamond Mill, Jesse, starts at the Montgomery County line. The range line runs down to there.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I didn't know where that.
But that's the reason that the Union, our addresses out there were Union rather than West Mountain, even though they're in Miami County.
It's quite big.
Our telephone number was 28F2, Glenna.
Ours was 2F23.
Also, Harry Donor, who I talked to a lot, and he also wrote up a lot of information back then. Harry lived back the Long Lane, not too far from the castles on the east of Garland and back on the south side. But he told me one time about the library that was in Garland, the largest circulating library in Miami County. Now, that's hard to believe, but that's what he said. And then in 1900 or around there, the library or the store burnt down, and it burned up all the books except the ones that were in circulation, so it never got established again. We mentioned the community house, then all the schools. You know, along Garland Frederick Road, starting at Route 48, which is Main Street out of West Mountain, there was Pig Eye, which is number 11 school there on the corner. Number 11, number 12, where Normal is to this day, and that was across from well, not catty-cornered, but across from your farm, the Castle Farm. Number 13 was where Kenny and most of the kids went at Garland. And then number 14 was on up across from Delks, up almost to Potsdam.
Brush Creek.
Brush Creek, yeah, right, 721. And early on in this, most of them were grades 1 through 8 early, and then they established them from 1 to 4 and 5 to 8. And I went to number 6 early, that was mentioned. The first 4 grades when I was started in school went to number 6, which was up on the Potsdam Pike, Melton, Potsdam Road and Range Line, that southwest or northwest corner. And that house that's there today is built on that foundation of that school. And of course, there are many one-room schools throughout Miami County, but there's 4 of them. I mean Union Township, but there's 4 of them right on Dayton, on the Garland Frederick Road.
Jane Staver went there, you went there, I went there, she went there, and she went there. All 3, all of us. Number 6.
Does anybody from the audience have anything you want to add or any questions you'd like to ask?
I just wanted to ask if they mentioned about having a school bus. Did you have a school bus for the all the time that you went to school, or?
Oh,
We did. I did.
Yeah,
I did.
yeah,
you did?
yeah, we did.
Well, the school bus didn't come until I went into the Westville 6th grade.
Oh, yes.
And Fred Hale was one of the drivers, and I forget who the other first one was. I didn't mean to discount that you wasn't on a school bus, but I was thinking here was when it started. And I went to number 12 school. I think I'm the only one, maybe here, went to the number 12 school, and Mother went there also. And there was only 5 grades there. And when they moved me on into Milton, that's when they consolidated. And there was 2 people in the 8th grade at that time, Brother Berlin and Lowell Gateridge. So I just wanted to say that.
Well, number 13, I was janitor there while I went to school there. I had to sweep the floor and oil the floor up and stuff like that, and wash the blackboards. You know, I think I made $16 a month. So it wasn't too bad.
We've heard in other communities there was a lot of discord about people having to kind of consolidate and go into Melton. Did the people out there mind that, going into Melton to school?
Didn't like it too well. No, because I remember in the year, see, what year was that? I don't know, that we were supposed to, I was supposed to go to Covington. You know, they closed number 6, and they were going to send me to Covington, and my dad said, well, she's too little to go to Covington that far. So I don't know how I got into West Milton. And then I went there the rest of that year. That was my 4th grade. And then the next year, all the country schools were open again. But there was this fussing around, you know, all the time until they finally got it through that we were supposed to have a big consolidated district.
Yeah, I can remember when they was gonna close all these schools, they come and took all the seats out of the schoolhouse at number 13 and number 6. And my dad and other parents got together and they made the school board put them seats back in at school and had school there again for a while.
The rest of that year, when
That was in 1935, 36 when that happened. And I know I went to West Melton for about 2 or 3 weeks before we all came back to our school. Like Kenny said, they took seats and everything out, but they had to put them back in. And then in 1939 is when now Jesse says he went there to Melton earlier, but we didn't go till 1939. That's when they closed number 6 and number 13. Because I was in the 5th grade then when we came. That's when Laura and Ludlow and all of them came to West Melton when they opened the new high school in 1939. The new one is old now, and there'll be another one open up when, next year? Yeah.
next year.
My dad made my sisters, twin sisters, and me go to Phillipsburg School while they had these seats out of the schoolhouse there.
Some Potsdam kids went to Franklin Monroe.
Yeah, Laura.
I remember that now, but I've forgotten.
And where was number 6 school at? It hasn't been told.
Milton Potsdam.
Milton Potsdam.
And Range Line, Range Line.
Right there where that White House sits.
Yeah.
Bargy lives there.
I just wanted it in the
Yeah.
thing.
Rex, what corner was the store on?
It's
The
northeast
northeast corner.
Northeast corner. Okay.
Yeah, and there's nothing there now. There's a house east of there that was built later, but that's part of their yard now, that house. It's east of that.
My parents bought the house on the
Is
northwest
that
corner
Eiley Blaylock?
of Garland and Range Line in 1945. When Dad came
I
back
think
from
it
the war.
is.
And moved from there in 1950 to North Development, 40-acre farm, North Development, 48.
What's your name?
John Hoffman.
John Hoffman.
Yeah,
Mom,
that's
Dad,
Eileen.
Charles
Okay.
Magdalene Hoffman.
Okay.
And I remember I've gone, Mom and Dad both passed away in 96. And I remember going through their stuff and I found the original bill of sale for that house. And I don't remember who they bought it from, and I never thought about it, I should have brought it if I could find it. But the sale
Let's see
price
what
of
that
the house
is.
was $6,500.
Would that have been Silers? Did Silers live there before that?
Well, yeah, Archie and Ruth Siler probably lived there right before that, and they moved to Ludlow Falls, and then probably your parents moved in there.
They
Well, no, they didn't, no, because there was Snyders that lived there, and Buck Spittler lived there.
Yeah, I remember.
Spindler's house was
Schneider.
bigger, but they might have bought the house from Spindler.
Yeah, right, and Chester Spittler lived there.
I remember, I didn't hear anybody mention Charlie Alexander.
Oh, yeah,
Clarence and
oh,
Charlie
yeah,
Alexander.
Oh, yeah.
Dutch Alexander.
Dutch Alexander.
Yeah,
Well, that's,
That was Dolores's,
yeah.
Marjorie and, what was the other?
Dorothy.
Geneva.
Geneva's
Geneva, yeah.
parents.
okay. I've got license plates, now that was, my wife was a Picadoo and, lived there on that farm, bought that farm from, where did they buy it from? They bought in 1958, mother-in-law, father-in-law bought it in 1958. And they found license plates that had C. Alexander on the back of them, and I've got the pairs of them. Still, old porcelain license plates from 1919, 20, 21, and 22, I think, and 25. And it's kind of interesting finding, especially with C. Alexander written on the back of them. They were in the basement of the house, I think the father-in-law said.
Doc Desecker was mentioned here a few times. Do you recall what your nickname was from Doc? Everybody had a nickname from Doc.
Oh, you're talking about him.
I know Rhoda's was Grandma. Mine was Towhead early on, and then it become Weisscup. I found out that meant smart aleck later on.
They called me Muggins.
Muggins.
Yeah.
Rex was a good football player, too.
Oh, I don't know what he called me. I was with Don. I also got one of those pamphlets too. But I hadn't said anything. I was scared. So,
Every little community had a character, so was this Dr. Eastecker the character
Yes.
from Garland?
he was a character.
Doc lived with his sister Sarah about a half a mile south of Garland. He ran the, as Kenny pointed out a while ago, he ran the cider mill. And by the way, there were a couple more businesses in Garland early on. The one where I was born, the garage there, which they just tore down this summer, well, it was a garage back in the 20s, and they worked on cars there. And then the one on the other corner where you're talking about, the garage there was a blacksmith shop. And you can still see the concrete floor of that garage.
Yeah.
We bought the house on the southwest corner in 1953 at Martindale, and we lived there until 71 when Kenny's dad passed away, and then we moved into town to run the store, and then our daughter Yvonne and her husband moved out there, and now they've moved, and their daughter, our granddaughter, and her husband live in that house on the corner now, and they tore that one barn down during the summer.
Sure looks nice.
When we first moved in there, there was a big barn on the Garland roadside
Right.
and a chicken house.
Mhm.
And we tore those things down, and then we planted grass and everything, but we didn't have plumbing inside. The only thing was electric, and that's all we had inside there. So moving from town out to the country and doing the things you do in the country, using the outhouse, and on the one porch, we had like a pump that we would pump the water in the summertime and then slop it all over you, and then soap up, and then pump again. And we had a shower curtain across the porch, so when cars were coming, they couldn't see us out there taking a bath.
Always wondered what that curtain is for.
It's
But
not who I thought
now,
it
Liza
was.
and her husband Jeff
Yeah, I didn't know that.
live there,
Let's see.
and they're doing a lot of work there.
There, she is.
My grandparents on my mother's side lived there all through the 40s. Sleppy, Henry and Anna Sleppy. And
Yeah.
before that was the Helmigs. Everybody knows Esty Helmig. And and it was his family, and I was talking to him yesterday, and I was wanting to know where all those kids slept. And he said, well, I slept between my two brothers. There was, I think, how many in that family? It was a large family, but anyway, I kept probing him, and he said, you just want to find out how poor we were.
Rex, tell about your grandpa making brooms. That was another.
Well, when my grandpa lived with us, we had a big barn out set to one side of the house too, and he made brooms up in the top floor of that barn.
I
And
remember that.
we sold some in the store, and
Yeah.
some he peddled house to house. And
I remember that
that, I
barn.
went along with him a lot of time.
You had to come around.
Well,
the curve.
my dad wasn't a dozen children, and I was the last one, number 12. They all
What'd they
passed
say?
away but me.
Tell about those parties we had every month.
Yeah, in the 40s, we started what was called a happy-go-lucky club, and there was all the kids around there. We had many parties, one some on the top of that barn at different houses.
The community building, besides all that you've told about, also had square dances in it. Some of the churches would come with their kids and have square dances in there.
Yeah,
And Halloween parties, I remember going to a Halloween party there.
They had suppers every month too. I think some of the milk or West Milk people came out.
Yeah, fish fries and oyster suppers at the community house. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Jane Strain's name. She's my Samuel and Effie's daughter, and she has lived in 5 different places around Garland, all within 5 miles of there. Now, Jane was a sister to Mildred, Polly, and Gladys,
Yeah.
brother to, or
Ralph and
sister
Burnell.
to Ralph and Burnell.
Yeah.
And Mildred was the one that was going to be on the panel, and she was the one that fell. And so she didn't get to be on here.
Oh, she did.
She fell.
I didn't know.
The last thing that I remember, we were talking about children, I was the last of 7. And my remembrance of going around Garland, because I was just a little kid, was every Sunday morning, Mother would get time to check everybody, and when we get just about to Garland, she'd whip out her handkerchief and make sure I got a spit bath on the way to church.
Read that.
How about your house?
She
The
just told
store, but the house part.
Well, she wanted me to bring that up. The house was 7 different levels where we lived. And I can't explain how it all was, but there was 7 different levels in that house that we lived in there on the corner.
Don't do that.
Okay, that'll be about the end of our taping, but you're welcome to stay around and talk as much as you like. We'll put the pictures on the table over here so you can look at them. If anybody wants to sign up for the DVDs, be sure and do that. But thank you all for coming. We appreciate you having an audience. Thank you.